Hi there, we're all here, and I'm calling the Wednesday, November 7th, 2018 meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Before we do the roll call, just wanted to let the members of the public know that we had been waiting for a quorum, which is why there was the delay. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Hudson?
Present.
Commissioner Woods? Vice Chair Callardine?
Present.
And Chair Wormick?
Present.
4 members present, we have a quorum.
Can we have a report and posting of the agenda, please?
Madam Chair, the agenda was posted on Thursday, November the 1st. This meeting has been noticed and posted in accordance with state law.
This is a time when we would have an acceptance of the agenda. I've heard that, do you have a?
I'll be asking to remove both items 1A and 1B from the consent calendar.
All right. We would go, thank you. Is there unanimity on that? Is that a motion?
I think it needs.
Oh, it doesn't need a motion. Okay, so I'll get a motion on the acceptance of the agenda, pulling the 2 consent calendar items.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Okay, public comment. This time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on consent calendar and other agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of this commission. Please note that the Planning Commission is prohibited from taking action on items not listed on the posted agenda. Members of the public who would like to comment on items 1A, 1B, 2A, and 4A are directed to comment under this section of the agenda. That covers every section of the agenda, so if any member of the public wishes to address the commission, now is the time to do it.
3A rather than 2A.
Oh, I'm sorry, 3A and 4, yes. There being no members of the public who wish to address the commission, public comment is closed. We're in consent calendar. The first item is the approval of the minutes of September 26, 2018. Commissioner Callardine.
Yes, Madam Chair. I have one correction of the minutes, and from my perspective, it's a little important, just a single word change, but it's on page 7 of the minutes, where we have all of our suggestions for consideration by the developer. Under mine, bullet number 3, we want to replace the word trailhead with the word undercrossing, or undercrossing and trailhead. My intent with the comment there was that I thought the undercrossing was extremely important. That is not to say that the trailhead is not, and we could certainly put in both words, but my real point of my comment was that the undercrossing, I was worried about conflicts with that, with the outfall, so that should be taken into consideration.
With that change, and your change is to the impact of the trailhead and undercrossing
Right.
at South Palm Canyon. With that, do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, can I make a correction
Yes.
as well? Under Commissioner Woods, it says no 10-foot retaining walls in overall wall height. It should be, my point was not just the retaining wall, but the retaining wall and the screen wall. So just no walls in overall wall height of 10 feet. That would be a combination of retaining and screening or privacy.
Madam Chair, I was not present at that meeting, so I'll be recusing myself from the vote.
Does that mean we don't have?
Can we go ahead with this, or do we need to?
We can go ahead with the minutes.
We can go ahead with it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second.
I'll second. You still need a second.
The motion was made by Commissioner Woods. Did you make the motion?
Certainly, I can make the motion.
And seconded by Commissioner Callardine. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-3 with 1 abstention. The second item is 1B, door brand for a minor architectural application to install a vehicular entry. Door brand for a minor architectural application to install a vehicular door brand for a minor architectural
Madam Chair, this has
application
happened at
to
City Council
install.
before. Let's take just a moment there. We should be okay.
To install a vehicular entry gate at the existing multifamily residential property located at 600 North Bellardo Road, Zone R2. Staff report, please.
Yes, Madam Chair and Planning Commissioners. This item is a request to install a new gate at the entry to the property, the 9-unit apartment property located at 600 North Bellardo Road. The proposed gate would be set back from the Bellardo Road entry property line 13 feet, as you see here on the site plan, and would also include a maneuvering area for a vehicle to enter the site and exit should they not gain entry to the property through the gate, as well as a keypad to access residents of the apartment complex. So a closer view of the site is shown here on the screen, showing the vehicular maneuvering on the northerly side of the existing driveway. And so the gate would be installed adjacent to that wall and, as I said, span the width of the driveway. There would be some improvements to the roadway or the curb there to allow vehicles to enter on to the side of that north side of the property. And because this is a 9-unit apartment complex, we do not anticipate additional stacking would be required due to the size. So it is essentially for a 1-vehicle entry and exit, potentially 2, depending on the sizes of the vehicles. The gate itself would be a 6-foot-high gate, and it would be a wrought iron steel fence that's roughly 5 foot 10 inches in height and with an overall height of 6 feet above the ground. So staff reviewed this in accordance with the zoning code sections 93.06, 93.05 of the zoning code, and reviewed these the proposal with the engineering and fire departments. They have the the city engineer has worked with the applicant to get the design to where it currently is to ensure that it meets the standards of maneuvering, exit, and other ancillary requirements. So the proposal before you is acceptable to the city engineer, and we have provided conditions from their office as well as the fire department to ensure emergency access is provided for the project. So I'll conclude with that. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Commissioner Callardine.
Yeah, I take these gates very seriously because the commission has a long history of being antithetical, or not in favor of gates. So I want to make sure that that this does require special consideration. Do we have any police data that would validate the claim of higher than normal crime rate?
I did ask the police department about calls for service for this area. They did indicate there has been 9 calls for service on this block for the past since January 1st of last year. One of those incidents was a break-in at the subject property, a vehicular break-in at the property.
Okay. Are we losing any parking spaces with this?
Yeah, so with the gate itself being installed, we're adjacent to where the maneuvering area is to get to the keypad. They would lose 1 parking space, but the property at being a 9-unit apartment complex with 2 bedrooms in each unit would require a total of 16 spaces. With the parking lot, with the loss of the 1 space, there would be 21 remaining spaces, so there would still be adequate parking.
And they have a way of dealing with the tandem parking there on site, or do you know how they deal with that?
I'm not sure how the owner designates parking.
Are we losing any landscaping that would be required by code?
There definitely is a small loss of landscape at the north side of the driveway. So there's nothing that's requiring that area remain landscape, but there would be a small loss of landscape for the maneuvering area.
Okay. And does anybody know what it's not on that drawing, but it's in the aerials. There's some sort of easement just immediately to the south of the project site. Do we know what that is? Is that a drainage easement or something? You can see it continues across the street.
Yeah, that property is owned by Riverside County Flood Control.
Okay.
So,
That answers that. Those are my questions.
and I would also just note that when we worked with the applicant initially, he had considered doing an entry on the southerly side of the driveway. Challenge with doing it at that location was there's an existing fire hydrant that is directly located at that location. So it became a challenge for creating a maneuvering area on the south side of the driveway as opposed to the north side. Plus, he did not want to remove an existing palm tree that was existing there.
Commissioner Woods?
Just for clarification, where the entry keypad is that a wall, a solid wall that's directly adjacent to it?
Yes.
That's a solid wall, okay. And just out of curiosity, this is just an exploratory question. There's where that solid wall is, there was landscaping previous that's being removed. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to pick up any landscaping behind the sidewalk. I see we have 26 feet, but before the car without hurting the turning radius. So it would be back of sidewalk on the property, private property, just because otherwise we have this long sidewalk and I don't know how the curb cuts are going to work, but there's really very little protection for a pedestrian. I know there is now, there's not much, but we are improving the site.
Yeah, it's something we can look at with our engineering office, and if the applicant is amenable to making those changes to the plan, I'm certain staff would be supportive of that.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hudson?
David, it's stated that this is a tubular steel gate. Do you have any more detail about what it looks like? Will it match or coordinate with any other fencing on the property? Or is it basically just a standard vertical picket?
I believe it's a standard vertical picket fence. It doesn't have any additional detailing beyond what they've provided in the front elevation. So I don't see that it would match the existing trash enclosure because that looks like it's actually a metal gate with screening slats installed. So this would actually probably be an improvement to that.
Okay, thanks.
Question for you on the trash. It looks like the trash will now be behind the gate. How are they going to get the trash out to the service that picks it up?
The applicant would have to work with Palm Springs Disposal to ensure that they had access to the trash enclosure.
And is that typical?
Yes.
And a second question, did you consider requiring that there be some decorative element to the gate so that it enhanced the streetscape?
The applicant was really proposing this as a functional solution to his issue because he was trying to improve the property for his tenants. He didn't really get into specifics about improving the design.
Other questions? The matter is before the commission at this point. Oh, one other question is why do they need the turnaround on the outside of the gate?
It's to avoid vehicles backing out into the street when they don't get access to the property. So they can maneuver on the property with the vehicle, pull out to the right in this instance to get back to the street without backing into traffic.
So this would be for a service vehicle? I don't understand.
It could be for a service vehicle or a visitor to the property who doesn't have a clicker. get through the gate.
Is that typical?
Yeah, it's,
If the person they're trying to call isn't home, for example.
Okay, the matters before the commission. Commissioner Woods?
David, could you pull up the site plan on the map? I'm just going to point out that I'd be for the project with this condition, if I can point out. This is a very long strip that's all hardscaped. This could be landscaped right in through here, and this could be a small landscape in through here. So my condition would be to provide some landscaping in those two locations to break up the pedestrian area from the drive aisles.
Go over those again.
So the drive aisle is here, and there's a drive aisle right here, and in between it's all hardscaped. So I was just offering in this area here some landscaping, and in this area just a small landscape strip in here to break the sidewalk from the drive aisle.
Would that work with a wide vehicle?
Yes, because it's 26 feet wide. So as long as it works with the turning radius with engineering.
Move to approve.
I'll second the motion, but I want to just discuss having them come back with the landscape and maybe come back with the design on the gate.
May I add a comment to Commissioner Woods? I appreciate, David, could you bring up one of the site photographs
Of the
from the
street.
street looking towards the property?
I only have them in the packet. I don't have them up on the
Okay.
screen.
Just visually, I'm referring to this image. It's the view from the street looking towards the,
It's this picture.
correct. No, actually, it's the other one. Anyway, my point is, I'm very much agreeing with Commissioner Woods on this, and I would like to propose maybe an alternate solution. From this photograph, there's a lot of paving for, the driveway and the parking area, which is fine. The driveway, after the gate is added, will be unnecessarily wide. So I agree with Commissioner Woods that eliminating a portion of the hardscape south of the driveway would be a good thing. I'm a bit worried about the concept of adding a small bit of landscape between the sidewalk and the drive access to the keypad, just in case there are really bad drivers. But I would posit maybe an alternate idea, which is to plant some vines against that concrete block wall to soften that. And maybe, since they're going to have to add pavement there anyway, they're yanking out landscaping, might be nice to add, instead of just the bare concrete, some decorative pavers or something. Maybe even permeable pavers. But perhaps that's something that can come back to staff for.
During the discussion, I've got another couple of questions. On how this will operate, will the residents have to go through the sort of the bypass system that you're putting in there? So they'll have a clicker that would open the gate, and they will sit there and go straight in, only guests. And we probably need a condition then for signage, for clear signage that says, resident guests and residents, and go this way and that way. Otherwise, it's an unusual way of laying these things out, and I think it's going to be very clear to guests that they have to go through this guest entry.
Madam Chair, if I might just interject here, I would like to avoid any additional signage on the exterior of the property if we could. Looking at a similar example, Tangerine Court, which is up at the corner of Vista Chino and North Palm Canyon, is a similar situation, does not have any signage there. It's quite clear from the call box, if you will, that that's where guests go to key in the code to gain access to the property. I don't know that signage is necessarily needed. Residents will understand where they need to go.
The residents will, but I
Yeah,
wonder if
but guests usually will look for the key box, and we'll see that there against the wall.
I think I agree with Flynn on the signage. I still think I'd like to see this come back or go to staff so that it's more aesthetic in terms of, and not just totally functional if we're agreeing. And I think the only reason I'm agreeing to this gate is that its proximity to an area that's difficult to park. But I'd like to make sure that it actually improves the streetscape if we're going to allow a gate, and that it's not just functional. So in principle, I'm okay with it, but I'd like the gate to be attractive, and I would like to see less pavement, probably permeable pavement, and some additional landscape.
You want to add to the findings? I think it's, what you just said is very important, that we want to have the findings state. We do have findings on this, right? Resolution?
Yes.
The findings should include the fact that our reasons for approval of this is that it is adjacent to a high parking demand area. We don't want this cited as a precedent all over the place.
Yeah, and just for informational purposes, when you look at the aerial view of the property and the surrounding area, all of the single-family homes on the west side of Belardo have a gate. This is one of the few properties on Belardo in this block that does not have a gate, albeit the properties to the north do not, on the east side of Belardo.
With single family, it's different, but they're asking for a commercial gate in an area that has single family. Therefore, I think it should add to the aesthetics of the street. So I'm not sure if anybody else feels it should come back to us.
I'd like to see it come back.
So then the motion is for this to come back. Do you want a time certain on this, Flynn?
There is no need, this is not a public hearing item, so we don't need to come back to a date certain, but we will bring this back to you in December.
Good, thank you. And you have enough from us to
Correct.
work with the applicant. Thank you.
Motion to continue.
So I have a motion. Do I have a motion to continue, Commissioner Woods? Oh, Commissioner Callardine? Do I have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Hudson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Now to the main item on our agenda. Is item 3, Woodbridge Pacific Group LLC requesting approval of final development plans for a 44-unit single-family residential, or for 44 single-family residential units from a previously approved preliminary development district in Phase 1 of the Miralon development located at 801 Sunrise Way. And in this instance, in addition to staff report, we also have a subcommittee, and I don't know if it'd be helpful to have the subcommittee give a report. Commissioner Hudson.
So,
Staff report, and then we'll have the subcommittee, and then we'll.
okay. All right, thank you, Chair Warmick, and good afternoon, members of the Planning Commission. So on January 25, that was the first time that this item was brought before the Commission. And at that meeting, the Commission felt that the final plans were not in substantial conformance with the preliminary PD nor the Miralon Development Design Guidelines, and so directed the applicants to make some revisions to the plan and directed the applicant to bring back the final plans. So the applicant did so, and so on October 10, the Planning Commission reviewed the revised plans, but were not satisfied that all their concerns and comments and recommendations have been met. And so the Planning Commission formed a 3-person subcommittee made up of Chair Warmick, members Hudson and Hochbein, to work with the applicant so that those comments and concerns and recommendations can be incorporated into the final development plans. The subcommittee met with the applicant on 2 occasions, And the last meeting was on October 23, 2018. At that meeting, the subcommittee thanked the applicant for improvements made to the plans, but had additional comments relative to some specific components or aspects of the plans. So I will take a quick minute to go through some of those comments and concerns of the subcommittee. So overall, again, the subcommittee felt that improvements have been made. However, that on Plan 1A, that there should be 2 types of materials used. And on Plan 1B, the subcommittee felt that the legs and columns of the cabanas that are being proposed were too thick. They ought to be reduced in sizes. And also that the cabana roof and eyebrow should be on different planes to create a better variation for those plans. On Plan 1C, specifically, the subcommittee felt that the cabana roof should be lowered and that the applicant should consider using metal instead of a smooth trowel finish on fascias. Also, that the cabana legs to be pulled in front of wall or inside of the front block wall. And that the accent paving on driveways should be in line with glass of garage doors. Also, that the applicant should make the front door on Plan 1C 4 different panels. And finally, on Plan 1C, that the applicant should use translucent glass gate doors to provide additional variations. On Plan 2B, the subcommittee suggested or recommended to the applicant the riglets on those plans should be made of stainless steel. On Plan 3A, the applicant was asked to use different paving details to provide a variety on the driveways. And then on Plan 3C, the applicant was asked to use separate block wall from board-formed concrete wall. And on Plan 4A, B, and C, the applicant was asked to remove stucco from underneath windows on the 2nd floor, and also to make the windows more operable in line with Plan 4B. And on Plan 5B, the applicant was asked to add gates in the courtyard area so that that area could be more functional. On Plan 5C, the applicant was asked to reduce the height of parapet over the garage area, and finally that he could raise the parapet over bedroom number 3 on Plan 5C. And then there were some discussions relative to landscape plan. The applicant was asked to review the Mirror Lawn design guidelines to make sure that the selection of street trees are consistent with those approved previously on the design guidelines. And the applicant was also asked to consider using or to have a preference. The subcommittee reiterated a preference for plants that will attract bees, butterflies, birds, such as the desert milkweed. So those were just the excerpts or a summary of the comments and directions given to the applicant. So the applicant has submitted a revised plan that responded to those comments. When the applicant comes up, he will be discussing those. Staff has reviewed the revised plans, and staff has determined that overall that they are in substantial conformance with the design guidelines and, of course, the directions and recommendations given by the subcommittee and the Planning Commission. And finally, staff will be recommending that the Planning Commission should find today's plans to be in substantial conformance with the Mirror Lawn design guidelines and the preliminary plans for this project, and approve the project subject to the conditions that the landscape plan be brought back or go back to the AAC for final review and approval. So, Madam Chair, that will conclude the staff report. If there are any questions, staff is here to answer those. The applicant is also here to make a presentation to you. Thank you.
Commissioner Hudson, do you want to comment from the point of view of the subcommittee?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'd like to apologize for being late. It's I know everyone's time is valuable, so I apologize again. The subcommittee, as Edward mentioned, we did meet twice with the applicant and had actually a very quick turnaround by the architect and the team members to basically redesign or augment the design of several of the models, and they did actually add an additional model of house type with a small courtyard. I think there were such a great number of changes made just in terms of proportion, how windows were handled, how the cabana pergola type element was handled in certain schemes, and then especially the two-story houses on the west side of Ambassador Drive, I think went from being a pretty problematic design to being actually a very good design. And again, I'd like to commend the architect and the applicant team. It's not an easy thing to have to sort of go back to the drawing board and redesign things when there's a deadline looming, but I think everybody was very cooperative, and I think actually more importantly, the final design, the outcome is a much, much better product for the developer. Thank you.
And those would be my comments as well. Thank you to the applicant for the work they did.
In particular, the comments, the changes on Plan 4 that we had requested, I think it looks like you incorporated.
I think what we'd like to do is have the applicant make a presentation on this, and then it'll come before us. I may have one or two comments because we're seeing some of these in the changes for the first time, but if you do have a presentation for us, if you'd like to come forward. Oh. It's on.
Oh, it is on. I'm sorry. Sorry. Oh, there it is. Yeah, Todd Cunningham with Woodbridge Pacific Group. I want to thank the members of the Planning Commission that were involved in the workshop subcommittee, because that was it was a lot of time for them, and it was certainly time for us. But the outcome, I think, is pretty good product. So we're pleased with the process and appreciate the time taken to do that very much. I think if I could just go up there and point at things rather than try to explain from here.
I think Edward has a mic you can use.
Yeah, I think that might be the simplest way. Okay, I'm going back to the last Planning Commission meeting, not the last subcommittee meeting, in terms of talking about changes. So one of the things on the site plan that we did, several things we did on site plan, we added an additional single-story house on the west side. Prior, we had a two-story house and a single-story house, and it was pretty much two-story, one-story, two-story, one-story, two-story, one-story, and it got to be very repetitive. So adding in another single-story broke up that repetition, monotony, if you want. The other thing we did on the two-story house, when we had the two plans on the west side, the garages were all on the left side of the house. So there was repetition that every house on the west side had a garage on the same side of the house. What we did is we redesigned the two-story house so the garage was on the opposite side. So now we have a garage, left side, left side, left side, right side, right side, right side, right side. So there's the garage configuration along the street changes. On the east side, we in order to break it up as best as we could, is we have these homes with garages on the right side, and then we flip right here to the left side. We can't alternate; it just doesn't work with the zero lot line in the front swimming pools. So one other thing we did on the east side was to pull a covered area here out and make it into a cabana or pergola in the front of the house. So that makes the front of the house look completely different than The Plan 1 looks completely different than the Plan 2 from the street, and we'll get into that with the elevations. So that's pretty much the changes we made for street scenes. You can see the cabanas in the front over here too. This is just more of the same street. This is the Plan 1, and you can see the cabana pulled to the front of the house. We added the block here. We had stucco, and we added block, so we get the stucco and the block with the cabana, so we get the variation in the material in the front of the house, but still a front pool. We cleaned up the parapet break going from the garage area to the back of the house, which is a 10-foot interior. So we have just one step up and one clean line right there. We also made a continuous clean fascia elevation, so we get on a more two-dimensional view a very linear looking clean elevation. This is the Plan 1B. This has the cabana on the front, pulled to the front. It's got a material on here that I gave Edward that we can pass around, but there is a masonry type material in the front of this house along with the block, and then there's some louvers here, and so we went through the work for the subcommittee and redesigned this several times and got it, I think, to where everybody's pretty happy with it. And then on the Plan 1C again, this is the cabana. We added, instead of here where we have louvers, we went to some translucent glass panels with a gate here that would mimic that. The other thing we did, and it'll show up here, is we used 3 different garage patterns. Now we're with pervious material. So we have the pavers going across on this elevation like that. On this one, it's actually a picture frame, which kind of mimics the garage door picture frame. So the impervious materials go around like that. And then on this elevation where we have the glass panels on the garage door on the left side, the impervious materials come up and line up with that. So that's another thing we did to break up the street scene. This is actually just a rendering of the rear of the homes. One of the changes we made was to make some offsets in the back of the homes, and as well as some additional covered areas. And so there's a lot more articulation on the back of all these homes than they were the last time that the General Planning Commission saw this. This is the Plan 2, and it's the A elevation. You can see that strong linear element right here and a clean parapet behind it. There's the front swimming pool. This is the side. A lot of the steps, there were a lot more steps in here, and now it's much cleaner. This is the B elevation that has the riglets. This is the side, and then this is the C elevation, which has a pretty strong entry element right there. This is the Plan 3. Now we're on the east side of the street, and these are pools in the backyard. This is a side entry house, where the entry comes around over here. We added all this material on the front of the house, masonry material, moved the window over, got a lot deeper, set it back in. This was completely redesigned to be, we added these corner windows. So these windows wrap around. So it's a corner window here and a corner window over there. Completely different look. Very strong elements to the house. This is the C elevation. C elevations we added. This is a board form concrete element that goes on the house, so it's horizontal, and I've got a small sample of that there that you can see the wood graining in the concrete. And then we popped this up a little bit to make this element a little bigger. We separated this return here from the block wall so they didn't come together, the block wall and the gate. These windows are set back a foot and go all the way to the ground, so that's a change, very strong element to the house. And then on the 2-story, we completely redesigned the 2-story homes. Like I said, we reversed the garage door to the other side of the house so that we had alternating garage door locations. We added all this glass up here at the top on this particular elevation. We added this element that pops out and wraps back. We narrowed down the second floor. It's a complete redesign. I think it looks great. Then on the B elevation, we did similar elements here with this element up above and then step back, and then some more articulation on the side. And then in this case, we got the corner glass where it comes over and turns back, and then the wood element. And you've got an example of that. It's not wood, it's a porcelain tile, but gets applied. And then this corner window is set in, and this is the plan 4C, which is a different solution to the second floor. And then you can see this board formed concrete element here, and the window set back a foot. And this is the new plan, the single story on the east side. The plan 3 on the east side, single story, has an entry around the side. This one has an entry into a courtyard. This is the masonry element on the front of that house. And then this is the B, 5B, which has the corner window that wraps back, a gate, and then there's a courtyard on the interior. And then this is the C, which has the board form concrete, the 1 foot setback that drops all the way to the ground. I'm trying to go through this as quickly as I can. And then the landscaping, we can talk about that. We have different block elements. On the 2A, 3A, and 4A, it's a staggered. On the plan 3B, it's a square stacked. And then on the 1B, 2C, 3C, and 4C, it's an elongated stack. So we vary the block on as to the side returns to the gates, or on the homes on the east side that have the pools in the front with block walls. That's how we vary that design element from elevation to elevation. And then we've got the landscaping we can look at. So those, as brief as I could, are the changes that we made.
Well, you're here, questions for you. Where are the mailboxes? If we can go back to the site plan, there are drawings of them here, but I couldn't figure out where you had them located.
I'm looking at my landscape architect. Did they now get on here, Jamie?
There's going to be one mailbox for all those homes, aren't there?
The question is
Can I get back to staff on that?
Yeah, the question is a question for Flynn, which is how many houses in between a mailbox do you usually see? Because I've seen about 10 houses on the same mailbox.
We don't have a specific requirement in our code. We take direction from the U.S. Postal Service in terms of the number of boxes. Let us do this. Let us work with the applicant on the location of those so that they integrate well with the landscape plan and so that residents are not inconvenienced by having to go too far to obtain their mail.
And probably not directly in front of any block of houses, so.
Yeah, in a location like this, there's an easement through here. That'd be a good place for them right there.
Comments to the commission. I know I have one or two. They're minor, but.
Yeah. What is that little easement I think you were just talking about it, that easement between those two lots there? Is that a drainage or is that a trail?
Drainage.
Okay. So it's not a public trail?
No.
Um,
The HOA maintained
And
drainage
I
easement.
may have missed this on previous plans, but on the conceptual site plan on page 2 of 6, we've got this, what I've noticed for the first time is an existing knee wall in the backyards. I guess that was where the old backyard fence was when it was going to be the golf course. I didn't realize that was existing until I looked at the aerials. It does. Some sort of knee wall there. And
There is.
I wondered what your plans were
It's
with
it's
respect to
about that high.
wall. About how high? Would you leave it there, so if somebody who wanted to go to access their easement would have to step over it, or
Step off of it.
is that how it works?
Can you,
Yeah. I'm looking at the master developer over here because they're the ones that put those in.
would you come up?
Brad Schuchart with Freehold Communities, the master developer of Miralon. With respect to the small pony wall in the back, yes, that is a legacy facility that was installed by the previous developer. We have this idea of an exclusive use easement for each of the lots that back to open space. We have a detail that would allow the builder to cut a notch in that wall to bring down a portion of it to essentially grade, to allow for pedestrian access out the back without having to step over anything.
So are they, again, this is something I've been confused about for a long time. Are the homeowners there that have the extra easements, are they going to be able to landscape the easement area the way they want to, or is that going to be?
No, that'll be HOA controlled and installed. And in fact, the landscaping behind the lots that Woodbridge are purchasing are in the process of being landscaped as we speak.
So while they have an easement over it, they're not going to be, what do they use it for if it's an association?
It's really access to the grove areas.
Yeah.
And
Added landscape buffer of some sort.
correct.
But they can't like put their pool out there or?
No, correct. There's, in fact, the design guidelines that were approved by this body and in the city council preclude any sort of installation back there beyond the approved.
Basically a landscape area that they have access to? But,
Correct.
But they can't do anything with?
Correct, and will be, like I said, HOA maintained. There's a gate at the back of each lot to allow the HOA maintenance crews to come in.
And you're going to allow access by either, by allowing notches in the pony wall?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, that was one question there. Let's see, are we, in the conceptual site plan, we also talked about a tubular steel fence, which I think is also maybe the same thing as the backyard view fence on one of the other drawings. Is that?
That's correct.
And is that, there going to be a gate through that for each one of the lots?
Yes, there will be.
So we would still have a gate, we'd have a notch in the pony wall and then a gate through the, and would the association put in the path in between, or how would that work, or just be make a path?
Yeah, it would be a footpath at the discretion of the homeowner, and then we're not constructing a path per se. These are relatively gentle slopes down in most instances, and again, it was simply to provide the whole point of the exclusive use easement area was to push the view fence down below the sight lines in rear yards to help homeowners enjoy the view of the groves as they evolve over time.
Will the notch be wide enough to allow someone with a wheelchair to get through?
Yes.
Another last question I have, we didn't get any street scenes like we had talked about, simulations. That was a request I thought we had made, but both with existing or the first and then the mature landscaping?
You're correct. It was a request we made, and I think the subcommittee didn't reiterate it when we were given the timeline on this. We didn't reinforce that or require the developer to bring it in. I think we were satisfied that there were enough changes in the street scene that we were comfortable with it. I think, is that fair?
I agree with the limited amount of time. I think the design team spent it wisely, producing images of the houses themselves and designing the house, redesigning the houses themselves.
Several times.
Several times.
I have one other comment unless one of you does. Oh, you can ask questions. This is before the commission at this point.
If it's before the commission, I just have some comments. And then
I do have one for you or for the designer as a question. Can I do that first? Page 36, 5B. It's the first time we saw the gates, and on this particular one, I think the gate should mirror the simplicity of the side gate. That it takes, I think, it sort of competes with the garage doors, and I would prefer that to be simple if that's something that is acceptable to you and your architect.
Yeah, that's fine. We can make that change.
This is now before the commission, so if people don't have additional questions of you, we'll go forward with it. Commissioner Woods.
Well, first of all, I want to really thank the applicant and his team and the subcommittee for working with it. Hopefully what an outcome is that we have a better product for not only for sale and for the profit margin of the developer, but for the city as a whole and the long-term livability of the city. So I really want to give everyone kudos for sitting down at the table and working through this, because I think what we've got is great. I really want to say that on Plan 3, the corner windows, the setback at 1 foot, fantastic. Nice changes. I think they'll make for a huge thing on Plan 3. Plan 4, the second floor with views onto the street, again, great, because it leaves the street kind of eyes on the street, which is a concept I completely believe in. I'll support the thing. I really do not like Plan 2, just as an FYI. I do like the fact that on some of them you brought the cabana forward, but I just don't like the fact that on Plan 1, as an example, for Plan 1, you've got some what I want to call peekaboo features. You've got the little glass features, and you've got the little louvered or perforated feature on the pool wall. Plan 2 doesn't have anything. It's just a blank wall. It doesn't even have vines on it. So I will approve it, and I thank everyone, but I just am not a big fan of Plan 2. Thanks.
I'd like to just echo all of Commissioner Wood's statements. Maybe to, well, I don't know, I like it still. I think it'll be nice with that courtyard beyond, and I'm sure the courtyard will have quite a bit of landscaping to give that house some character. I'll just reiterate, I'll be very quick. I'd just like to thank the applicant again, the architect, everyone involved. I think it's going to be a very exciting project, and I can't wait to take a tour of the model homes. Thanks.
Really not much to say other than to echo again, the comments here that this is a really good example, like a couple of other recent projects that we've done where the subcommittee process has worked very well in terms of, I think, really improving the design of these projects. And I'm glad to see that the architects on the commission here are getting double duty. I really don't have any other comments that I want to make since you've answered all my questions.
At this point, there's a motion. We can make a motion. I've had a lot of time to speak, but I will make the motion on this. And I think with the items that have been before the commission, move approval with the condition that the applicant work with the staff to find an acceptable location for the mailboxes that works also with the post office, and also that the footpath, there be a notch in the pony wall going into the exclusive use common area on those houses that are next to the Grove, and that notch be wide enough and the slope be gentle enough that a wheelchair could go through it. And with that, and the other change was the one change on page 36 on 5B to simplify the front door, or the front gate. to the courtyard. And with that, this one question for Flynn, this has a condition in it that the landscape goes back to the AAC. Is that because we don't have a plan for the landscape, or because we have renderings but no plan?
No, it's because we want to review the final landscape plans in conformance with the conditions that both the AAC and you have placed on the project. We discussed the fact that in terms of the materials to attract birds, butterflies, et cetera,
Right.
we just want to review that last final version of the landscape plan.
So that's the focus of it, and the
Correct.
placement of the trees on the street.
Correct.
Okay, so
And
with,
feral cactuses are overused.
were barrels used in this?
Yes, they're listed.
So with a,
Not gonna,
it's not a condition, but possibly the architect will look at the fact that they're alternates to barrel cactuses that work beautifully in the valley.
becoming de facto standard.
Expensive standards. So with that, is there a second or any changes? Moved and seconded, do you have any changes? Comments on the motion? Can you call the question, please? This is approved 4-0. Thank you very much. We're looking forward to touring it.
See if you get us invitations to it, even if we're not on the commission anymore.
Okay. The next item in front of us is, we had coming to us, but Flynn, we don't have to comment on it. Was this the final draft of the small lots?
Yes, you had requested at your last meeting that you wanted to see the final language and requested some additional images, and so those are provided to you as informational items only. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to see me after we finish our meeting today.
Thank you. The next item before the commission is the discussion of the Architectural Advisory Committee process. And staff report, please, on this.
Madam Chair and members of the commission, at our last meeting, we had talked about the idea of some process modifications to our architectural review process. As part of that, I just wanted to remind the commission that in the list of recommendations of changes to our Plan Development District Ordinance, the ad hoc PDD subcommittee had also talked about revisions to the AAC process and had suggested what you see here on the screen in front of you, and that is relative to modifying the entitlement process to send applications to the Planning Commission first for land use approval, and then to the AAC for architectural review. When the Planning Commission reviewed the recommendations of the ad hoc PDD committee, they made a slight modification that you can see there in the red. And what the Planning Commission had recommended is that Planning Commission review development standards and conceptual architectural design first, and then forward to the AAC for architectural review, and then return it back to the Planning Commission for final review. And so that was the recommendation of the Planning Commission. So again, this is on the work plan for staff to look at as part of the larger changes to our Plan Development District process. And we are having this as a discussion item today to get your input, your feedback, and to take direction from you in terms of what you would like us to study and what you would like us to develop to come back to you. I put together a comparison table, and this is by no means complete. So identifying a couple of different ways to think about the process, and then identifying some pros and cons. And again, I'd certainly invite your feedback in terms of any other pros and cons you may see to these processes, as well as any other way that you might want to look at the process. In terms of the current process, you see that in the very last line, and that's relative to our review process, that AAC is the first, or the step one in the process, where they review the architecture and then forward it to the Planning Commission. Step 2 is Planning Commission review, where you review the site plan and development standards, and then you approve the architecture at that stage. So that is our process currently. What has been recommended by the ad hoc PDD subcommittee is option number 1, where the Planning Commission would review the site plan and the development standards and approve those at that point in time, and then conditionally approve the architecture subject to AAC approval. Step 2 would then be the AAC review, where they would review the architecture, take into consideration any comments of the Planning Commission, and then that would be the final part of the process. Option number 2 reflects the comments of the Planning Commission relative to the PDD recommendations, where Planning Commission would have the review, they would approve the site plan, take an initial look at the architecture. AAC would then review the architecture, and then we would bring it back to the Planning Commission to review what the AAC had done. And so that was option number 2 in the process. You can see some pros and cons there. Again, one of the things I think that we need to be mindful of is the number of steps in the process. That, you know, as it is, many of our applicants go through multiple meetings of the AAC and the Planning Commission right now. And as we think about modifications to the process, how could we shorten that down so we as staff and you as the boards and commissions aren't spending as much time as you have been on these. And so that's one of the things I think that we need to think about, but certainly would like to take your input in terms of the process. One of the things that I would like to do as we get a little bit further down the road with this discussion is maybe have a joint study session with our Architectural Advisory Committee. I had indicated to them on Monday at their meeting that you all would be discussing this as kind of an initial step today, and that they would be brought in later on the process, and we would join with them on that. Also, another thing I'd like to look at, I had a request to provide to you the process that Santa Monica uses. And so I provided a handout to you there at your seats. And Commissioner Hudson, if I failed, do you have that? Okay. I provided that to you. If you'd like me to look at any other cities in terms of their process, I'd be more than happy to do that and provide that information to you. So again, this is just an initial stage. I'm looking for direction from the Planning Commission as to what we might want to investigate and then how we'd like to move forward with that. So that concludes my presentation. And at this point, I'd like to hear your discussion, questions, comments, and direction.
Commissioner Callardine.
I had some concerns about this back when we, in the PDD committee, as you may recall. I think fundamentally, the Planning Commission has got to be responsible for the approval of the final architecture unless we really change the structure of the committees. If the Architectural Review Committee is really going to be the final approving authority for architecture, as opposed to this body, then I think that should be a city council appointed committee. So that it's closer to the council. I really think it probably is best to leave it the way it is, where we are the final authority, and the Architectural Committee makes recommendations to us. But I would be very concerned about any proposal that would say the Architectural Advisory Committee would have a final plan, a final approval over architecture or any other major elements of the design without a Planning Commission final approval.
I just want to speak because the reason we have Santa Monica in front of us is that I served for 6 years in Santa Monica, and we had a very different structure, and it worked beautifully. We had a planning commission that looked at site plans, massing, entitlements, discretionary approvals, but then the architecture, and could and did make comments on the architecture, but the architecture went to a body that was appointed by the council that had final approval on architecture. It only came back to the Planning Commission if the applicant appealed the decision of the AAC, and the Planning Commission's decision was final. During the years that I was there, I think we only had 1 or 2 appeals in 6 years. The designs that came out were great, and we didn't have the confusion of an AAC working with something before the site plan and the uses, the massing had been approved. And I think here it's a difficulty. The other thing that we didn't have to do is we didn't have to have architects necessarily on the Planning Commission, because the idea was approving the discretionary approvals, and the hard architectural lifting was done at a body that was appointed by the council. It was easier on our applicants. I never thought the designs came out. I thought what came out of it was really very good. The part of the reason I like that as opposed to what we do now is exactly what happened to applicants in this process, which is they went through a couple meetings of AAC and then through us and several meetings, and it added months to the timeline. And yet what we had here was very important. It's an important development. It's important that it's done right. So I do think it would require a fundamental change. I think the other change would be to do the site plan first and then send it to AAC and then do finals here. I think you have to do one or the other, but I've watched AAC struggle, and I think there was the Curve Hotel was one of my examples where people didn't know what the ultimate structure was going to be looking like when they had to work on designs, and they were working on designs where the structure didn't necessarily get approved by the commission later. I think Chris Pardo's hotel, the Bellardo, was another example of that, where I think the process we have doesn't completely work.
I'm sort of torn on this. I do want to make the process much clearer, more streamlined, especially for the applicants. But just to point out, Santa Monica obviously is a larger city, in a larger metropolitan area, and has a much larger number of architects to draw on for the architectural committee, as a comparable city, West Hollywood, let's say. There's dozens and dozens of architects in that pool. We have good architects here as well, I hope so, but there's just not quite as many people. And I think for an AAC that you're referring to, Kathy, that you would need some really strong individuals. And sometimes I think we do have some, especially now increasingly so, some strong individuals on AAC, but I think in order to do option number one, I think we would really have to have a good, strong AAC. I would sort of like to posit, though, that maybe there's a hybrid. I don't think as part of this process, the role of a subcommittee, architectural subcommittee of the Planning Commission is stated. I think step one definitely should be, the site plan, the basic layout of the site, the basic attitude about massing of the building. And when I talk about site plan, it's issues like orientation, to the sun, to views, to wind. To be honest with you, I'm working on it, and I apologize to Flynn, but I'm looking at a list of things that would be required at each one. And I'd like to encourage Flynn, maybe you should take a look at the city of Seattle. Obviously a much bigger city, but even for smaller projects, like let's say a 10-unit condo building, they have a pretty strong list of context diagrams, neighborhoods. I think too often we ask for, an aerial photo or a street montage of existing buildings, and I think that should be part of the application. With services, all the computer options involved, it's not too hard to gather all that information, and I think that's really important when one analyzes a site plan. It's not a site in isolation, but it's a site as part of a neighborhood and as part of a city. And then, you know, I think at step one, yeah, the architecture needs to be sort of sketched out in a way that provides enough information so that commission knows sort of what the quality of the project is going to be. But perhaps every building, you know, just to use the project we referred to today, analyzed today, you know, at that first step one, maybe not every building needs a full elevation. Maybe it's a couple typical buildings or a typical portion of the building that would give a sense of scale, windows, you know, materials even. And then I think once the commission had had the opportunity to really look at the project, understand the project, would be then that next step that we've started to institute, or utilize rather, is a subcommittee. In other words, between step one, and I'll call it step 1A, which is the subcommittee, the applicant then could take their original submittal and layer on further information or make changes that were suggested by commission in step one, and then work with the subcommittee at step 1A to really get the design a much clearer understanding, I think, between the commission and the applicant about, you know, what the expectations were. Then, you know, I think the AAC could review the total package in sort of much more detail. I think by then, the basic site plan would have been, dare I say, sort of bought off by the Planning Commission. And the AAC then would be doing the things that they do well, which is looking at materials, looking at landscape, looking at, you know, final window sizes and alignments and, you know, reglets and all that sort of fun stuff. And then I'm sort of torn. I'm not sure whether I'm comfortable with the AAC approving and then the project just moving forward, or whether it needed to come back. So I'm tending, to be honest with you, with option number 2. But I think with a much more streamlined, organized, delineated list and process early on, that the applicant won't have quite as much confusion, you know, towards the end.
Can I ask a question on the process?
No, just let's go through comments first.
In our city of Palm Springs, in the short term that I've been on this commission, I have seen tremendous benefits by the way that we're currently operating. I mean, tremendous benefits on that. I think we get a superior project. I mean, just today with the Miralon project, we now have materials that will patina well versus age poorly on a project. And granted, that project may have taken a while to get through the process, but I think ultimately for the good of the city and for the overall benefit of the city, it was a process that worked for the applicant and for us. I think another option could be is that it doesn't appear that we have, like other cities, city of Santa Monica and the city of West Hollywood that was mentioned, we don't have an urban designer on staff. So an applicant can come in with a design that is nowhere near something that we have envisioned either in our general plan or our design guidelines, and they try and push the project through, and we leave it up to our AAC as the first body to kind of talk and massage them through the process to get to a place that we're at. When, in essence, if we had a qualified urban planner on staff, some of that massaging could be done before it even reached the public forum in the background, and it could save a lot of time. And usually that urban designer has skills not only in streetscape design, but they have skills in architecture as well, and many times they are an architect of training. Many times that urban designer can do double duty. They can be an urban planner as well as an urban designer on staff, so they can carry both roles very efficiently for the city. I truly believe that as a planning commission and appointed directly by the city council, that the urban form is not just the massing, that the urban form is very much related to the architecture as well, and that we should have a decision-making process in that after it's been massaged by AAC. And that includes things like lighting. I mean, something simple as lighting. You know, you can have a parking lot with lighting that just glares everywhere, and it makes a city look not as a world-class city. And I think we really are striving to be a world-class tourist destination and maintain that. And I think it's important that we have a series of processes that get us through there as quickly as possible and help the applicant in that process. So I'm an advocate of how we're currently working. And I think the process is working. We have some bumps in the roads with some people, some applicants who maybe don't want to pay attention to staff or to listen to others. But we saw today when somebody does cooperate, we get a great project on that. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Good questions, yes.
Yeah, if some of the proposals would actually separate out site plan approval from architectural approval, a lot of these projects these days, the one action that we take is the major architectural approval because we don't really have site plan review. If we were going to separate that out, we'll probably have to have some sort of site plan approval action that the Planning Commission could take in some form or another to say that, yeah, this is the site plan, this is the form, this is the, all the urban stuff that we've been talking about. That might be a good idea. If we're going to head that way, I think we would need a formal step in there that says, this is what the Planning Commission has approved at the site plan, and then you work with it, AAC, for the architecture. Mm-hmm. I'm still actually with the Commissioner Woods. I think what we have now is working pretty well. I'm on the school that every organizational that you come up with will have its own problems created by that particular organization. There's no ideal one that you can come up with, and right now we have our system, and it creates some problems, and we know where the problems are, and we sort of deal with them and just make it work. That's the way a lot of human systems work. Some people try to scramble it occasionally just for fun. But I think just moving this around is going to just create different problems, and that I think the Planning Commission is still going to want to see, in most cases, the final designs.
The worry I have, and I'm just looking at a commission saying, commissions, I see that sometimes with city council, nobody likes to give up things, power and things that they have. And so, and I'm looking at the three of you saying, is that part of the issue here? I think this process did not work terribly well for the applicant. They went through, they missed several months of getting into their working drawings because they went through lots of different steps. And that's a concern that I have. I mean, one simple improvement on this would be to have AAC be a more sit-down body with people meeting in a conference room and sitting across a table and not having it be a formal working body. That's something we can institute easily. I also look at our staff time, which is limited, and they end up doing reports and meetings and packets and re-reports and re-meetings and packets, and we don't have the luxury of as much staff time as we're giving to this if we want staff to be doing kind of the urban design issues, looking at things that we've been talking about, nor do I think we're systematic. I didn't see lighting in this package today. I actually have been recently working with designs that came out at Ascena from one of the projects, and lighting completely got missed and didn't get added into what the merchant builder was doing. So I just think we need to figure out a way of addressing it so that it goes more smoothly. And I think we have to be open to ceding authority if that is what it would take.
I just had two quick thoughts based on your comments. Number one, I agree with your comment that the folks at Miralon lost time through this process, but what I do think is that the ultimate product that we got out of that was a much improved product, and I do appreciate the efforts of the subcommittee in working with the applicant and doing that. So it took a long time to get there, but I think the ultimate result was a good one. I think we just need to work on how we can shorten that front end process. One of the other things that I see right now with our current process that I'm just going to throw out here for the board is that sometimes we have conflicts between the direction given by the AAC and direction given by the Planning Commission. That sometimes the two bodies have different approaches or different things that they are looking at in terms of architectural design. And that's one aspect where we do have some comments from our applicants saying, well, AAC told me to do this, but then Planning Commission doesn't like it, or vice versa. And so that's just another thing that we need to be cognizant of as we look at this process.
You need a decider.
Can I comment?
Yeah,
next?
please.
I've, sat on both AAC and Planning Commission for a lot of years. When I first started on AAC, Jim Chiaffi was chair, and Jim, he was very clear and didn't allow things to sort of wander around. But he said some really good things, I think, that, the AAC had these goals in mind: be direct, be clear about things. And to be frank, I'll just get to the chase. I think sometimes the AAC is a bit timid, and they're not quite sure what we as commission want to do. So that's why I think this concept of a joint meeting, and maybe a fairly regular joint meeting, that discusses, okay, what is our goal as a commission? What do we want projects to really be analyzed for? And in other words, give the AAC a bit more sort of marching orders or expectations, and then they can feel a bit more confident, I think, about giving direction. To be honest with you, just referring to our project today, I think AAC should have been tougher actually earlier in the process. And that's why when it came to this commission, I could not in good conscience say, yeah, this is okay. Yeah, that's conflicting opinion, and sometimes it's very frustrating. Design review is not easy on either side of the table. But I think, just again to reiterate, I think if we had that joint meeting, understood a bit more that we need to be very strong about certain things very, very early in the process. And perhaps, some of the landscape issues, I hate to say, or even some of the material issues can be sort of put to the background, but really concentrate early on site plan certainly, and then basic massing, because those are the really time-consuming things. With this merchant housing product type, it's developing floor plans, it's developing elevations, and all that stuff takes a lot of time. And to come back and have to redo that is frustrating.
Is there can I?
Wait a second, because I want to comment on what you said. There have been a lot of times where I've said to AAC members, if you hate it, don't pass it through. And I think we've gotten that a number of times where they get tired of a project, they look at it again, and finally they approve it, but they don't really like it, and they don't tell us until later. And I can think of some commercial examples and other times where they were braver, and they turned things down. They came to us, and we did hard work on them. Here, I was disappointed in them because we had design guidelines that we worked on, and we actually worked on with a member of the AAC where we worked to formulate the guidelines, and they never looked at them when they passed the project on to us. So I know what you're saying in terms of how, and one of the people in the public once referred to them as the Commission of Little Changes, Tiny Changes, which was actually fairly apt, even though it was mean at the time. It wasn't said in a nice spirit. But it's also that they don't have, they really don't have ultimate responsibility for it. And so when it passes out of their hands, it's not that they know that's what's going to be built.
Would another suggestion be, where we lose some time, is in the subcommittee process, happening after the Planning Commission starts its review. Could we, if we somehow in a project identify that this project was going to have some significant architectural issues at the AAC, then form a joint subcommittee at that time to look at it from both the PC and the AAC, so that when that subcommittee comes back, that'll be recommendations first to the AAC, but there should be more consensus between the two groups because they work together on the project. You know, maybe we've had joint subcommittees on some things already. I don't know how that has worked, but in theory it might work.
But do you really want to ask staff to be in the role of saying, this is going to have major architectural issues?
Well, the commission could make that finding, or the architectural committee. Invoke the...
I'll add something more here. I think if we did, I keep coming back to it, it's a lot of work to establish, but if we did have a stronger set of required exhibits, documents for a project to be introduced to the commission for review, I think the process would be streamlined quite a bit. Right now, sometimes the first go around, there's just not enough information to give a good analysis of a project. And I think if this perhaps will cut down on staff time, to be honest with you, because if an applicant has a list of expectations, then staff, I think, will just sort of say, okay, applicant, you have not provided this documentation, hence you cannot bring your project before us, before the Planning Commission or the AAC. I think it'll take pressure off of staff if I think we are a world-class city, in terms of design. I think our expectations should be much higher, and they should be somehow codified. I mean, aesthetics is a really impossible thing to do that for, but I think urban design issues, architectural massing issues, those can be spelled out. But the easiest thing is to, at least at the minimum, require vicinity information about the neighborhood and how it fits into the city and how it fits in environmentally. I think if a lot of those things are addressed, the applicant knows that they're going to be grilled about that the design is going to be challenged on those issues, that, a lot of this work will have been done earlier.
If I could just make some comments. I would, development is a risky business. We can take a certain amount of the risk out of that business, but not completely remove the risk on that. I think we can take steps in looking at this to try and alleviate. I think one was mentioned was to codify some of this stuff that is problematic. It appears that we did codify it with Miralon. That's where maybe up front, if we had an urban designer on board, something like that could be fleshed out earlier. Some improvements I might suggest is that we report out a little bit differently what AAC has done back to this commission. Maybe it's somebody from AAC, maybe it's a more formalized reporting back to this body of what happens. I find it very informative what AAC has done on various projects. So maybe we can look at the reporting out. I like the idea of a joint meeting. I think part of it is education and timing, taking the time to learn all of our different areas, specific plans and whatnot. Knowing the design guidelines takes a lot of work and a lot of commitment. Maybe we need to foster a little bit of that. Staff can have little training sessions or whatever on that. And as far as the conflicts of different approaches, one thing that I've noticed is I think the term was that the AAC feels timid. In the few meetings that I felt, they feel, I think, more constrained. And maybe we need to give them a little more leeway in what that they look at, because they are just ultimately recommending to us, and maybe a little more leeway in what they're looking at beyond just the architecture, so that they can do a more full breadth review for us and not feel as timid. And then I totally agree that we need creative architecture in the city. Thank you.
Not enough information.
When I was looking at this, just at Santa Monica, they actually asked for, in some of the site plans, they asked for more guidance on site plans from the AAC and more review. Flynn, do you have enough? You have a mix of comments.
Poor Flynn.
Yes, I do. I have a good mix of comments. One of the things that you mentioned, Doug, you'd like me to take a look at Seattle, so I'll start researching that and get that together, and offered kind of a hybrid model of how we might look at that. And then in addition to the other comments that were made, my question to you all is, what should we do as our next step? Would you like to have an additional discussion on this after we have some more materials from other cities? Would you like to have a study session with our AAC, or what should our next steps be, I guess, is my question to you all.
I'd like to see a little more materials from other cities that have done this well, and maybe people to talk with in those cities about how different processes work.
Okay.
And then a discussion with the AAC.
Okay.
Could we maybe do a survey of some of the Coachella Valley and other Riverside County cities to see, first off, if they have an AAC process, and if the AAC process is recommendatory to the Planning Commission, or if it's final?
Okay.
Just referring back to Seattle specifically, I go to the city's website often just to look at projects. And they have a step in certain projects called early design guidance. And I'm not sure what the specifics are, but when you look at the documentation at that stage for a project, it's just basic site issues and site massing. And I've got to think that is in order to sort of expedite things and speed things along. So I'm going to review the site myself to see what each step entails. But that might be another way of looking at it, is just having a nomenclature for different reviews. And maybe it's not for, obviously, small projects, but for bigger projects it might be useful, especially, with risk to developers. I think that would go a long way.
Okay. Okay. So let's do that then. We'll go ahead and do some additional research. I'm guessing that we probably will not come back to you until January with some additional information, and I apologize to Chair Wermuck and Vice Chair Callardine. You probably will not be with us then, but anyway, we'll go ahead and do some additional work before we come back.
Okay, so shall we go into, I think we're finished with this item unless there are additional comments. The other thing, though, we do need to, we have some applicants, we have to sort of look at when the city is choosing, is appointing, but I think we have two people whose terms end at the end of the year, and we haven't received a lot of applications for AAC, and in fact, we haven't received sort of the more diverse applications we were hoping to receive, so that if any of us know people that we would like to serve on the AAC, possibly we should be in touch with them. The last time we made appointments, it was actually the fact that people went out, new people, and recruited them, that got us some of the new and very strong members of the AAC. So
We apply for the AAC?
I'm sure people can apply for different commissions. I think the requirement is you can't apply for more than two. Am I correct on that in terms of the city's website?
Yeah, I believe you're correct on that.
So they want a limitation. So if people are applying, they should be cautious about how many they apply for.
Cautious and serious.
And strategic, yes. So going to Planning Commission reports, requests, and comments. I have one from the subcommittee that met today. We were talking about density transfers, and our thought was that we should probably, it's very difficult to do a separate density transfer ordinance when we're looking at transfers from golf courses to hillsides, because this zero allowed to 1 per 40 acres, in some of the instances, unentitled 1 to 40 or 1 to 20 is hard to do that kind of a transfer. We were thinking that we needed just some strengthened language regarding this in the golf course conversion ordinance rather than a separate density transfer ordinance. So I think we were going to be looking at language and trying to get that back probably as soon as possible so we can have that before we meet with council. Are there other reports, requests, comments? City Council liaison report. Our City Council liaison isn't here. Planning director's reports. And maybe, Flynn, can you talk to us about where you are with software in terms of the city getting you good planning software so we can track things?
We have made a recommendation to the city manager in terms of the system that we would like to purchase. It actually has a relatively low purchase price and can do many of the things that we really need it to do. And it's a system that would be utilized not only by the Department of Planning Services, but also by building, engineering, finance, licensing, et cetera, so that we would be able to have all city departments using the same system and sharing that information back and forth, which is one of the biggest handicaps that we have right now. This particular system would also allow for the online submittal of applications and materials and being able to pay online, which I think would be a terrific service for our applicants and our citizens as well. So we have made that, recommendation to the city manager, and we hope that they'll be moving forward with that here shortly. So fingers crossed. I have a couple of other things to report to you. I had mentioned at our last meeting that we had a tentative date for a joint Planning Commission City Council meeting. We were originally looking at November 28th, and on that agenda we would be discussing the golf course ordinance, the Planned Development District ordinance, and the small lot ordinance. Unfortunately, I don't believe that date is going to work, so we may be looking at the first 2 weeks in December for a joint meeting. I don't have a definite date for that yet, but I will keep you all apprised once we have a date for that meeting. At our last Planning Commission meeting, we appointed members to kind of an ad hoc design subcommittee to handle this interim until we get a new AAC process in place. The AAC also appointed 2 members to that subcommittee, and what I would like to do is use that for the next group of homes that we have coming forward in Miralawn. Gallery Homes has had a meeting with staff, and they look like they will be ready to come forward here shortly. And so what we might do is have them meet with our subcommittee first to get some initial comments on their proposal, their proposed designs. Excuse me? No, we would do that as a subcommittee meeting before it goes forward to the AAC, the standard AAC and Planning Commission process. And so they have appointed members, and we're ready to move forward with that. Who have they appointed? They appointed Mr. Jakeway and then Mr. Rotman. Speaking of the Architectural Advisory Committee, with the resignation of Mr. Donenfeld, we have a vacancy for our December AAC meetings, and I need a volunteer to fill in there.
I'll do it.
Okay. Chair Wehrmuck, thank you very much. Ms. Hintz, if you will help me remember.
Is that only one meeting?
At this point in time, it will only be one meeting in December. The next thing in terms of Planning Commission business, we currently have 8 items scheduled for the December 12th meeting, and I potentially have 3 additional items that may go on that agenda that are critical. And so I will be asking you all to have a second meeting in December. I don't have a tentative date yet. I would like to keep it early in the month. so that we don't interfere with any vacations or holidays. And Commissioner Hudson, I know that you will be out the second part of December on the 14th. Okay, thank you very much. That will help us in trying to schedule that then. Okay. And what I will probably do is just contact you via email to look at potential dates, as we won't be having a meeting until December the 12th. Let's see, I think I've taken care of everything. The last thing, and probably the most important item to discuss with you, is a date for our annual holiday get-together with our AAC and by invitation our city council members. We are potentially looking at one of the first weekends in December, potentially looking at December the 6th, which is a Thursday night. That gives more of my staff the ability to attend, or December 7th or 8th. Just looking at your calendars generally, does that appear to be a good weekend for you all, a good string of dates? Okay.
Drinks has resigned. Commissioner Donenfeld prepared and purchased and served drinks for 6 years at our parties. So we're going to need a replacement in that category.
Let's see, an expert bartender, if you will.
An expert bartender.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and look at those dates, and December 6th seems to be favorable, so we will try and work on that date. And that concludes my comments to you.
Quick question. The I think it's called the Tovar Hotel project on North Palm Canyon there across from, what was the one that we looked at for so long? It seems to have gone fallow. Okay. Do you know what's happening there?
I do. We actually held a meeting with them this week. There have been some issues in terms of the maintenance of the site relative to the city's vacant building ordinance. We met to discuss that, as well as the fact that their approvals that they received, the conditional use permit and the major architectural approval, are set to expire here. And per the language in our code, unless they have commenced construction, they need to file an extension of time application. At that meeting, the applicant indicated that in the past 2 years, they've been working on their financing. One of the things that they were required to do is to actually look for a hotel brand as part of their financing requirements. And because of that, they will probably be coming back to us rather than with an extension of time application, but with an amendment to their conditional use permit and their major architectural to add a restaurant building and some additional parking on the site.
Which hotel is this?
Excuse me?
I'm sorry.
This is the Tova Hotel, which is located on the west side of North Palm Canyon, just north of Vista Chino.
The one we took the restaurant out of?
Oh.
We took the restaurant out of it.
Yeah. So again, we do expect them to be filing amended applications that we'll bring to you either in December or January.
The Orchid Tree Hotel, that's due to
Orchid Tree
expire.
will be on your next agenda for an extension of time.
And the Little Black Hotel that we approved, it was...
I don't have any additional information. They had submitted applications for building permits, but have not actually had those issued yet. And I don't know why they have not done that.
Somebody told me that they were changing the concept of that somewhat.
We haven't had any contact from them relative to that. But they did submit building permit applications for the design as approved.
Do we have applicants? We created a 2-year timeline with the 2 years of extension. Do we have projects that are running out of extension time or that have died? Given the
yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of any. We've put applicants on essentially a 1-year calendar for most of the projects that have come back since we revised our ordinance. I can't think of any off the top of my head that are pushing up against that deadline. I think the ones that we've approved will have the possibility of another year. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, have we had any that have died? And I can't think of any right now.
Flynn, there is one with freeway development.
Has that one died?
Yes.
Okay. We had a project up near the I-10 freeway. It was a hotel project that was having issues in terms of sewer. And Edward informs me that that project has died, has expired. That one had gone on for more than 10 years of extensions.
It was 12 or 14, I think.
Yeah, so that one would be appropriate to come back.
Thank you. Are there more comments? The meeting of the Planning Commission is adjourned until next week, Wednesday, which is the...
Yes, November the 14th, and we will also be starting that meeting at noon because we have a city council meeting that evening and have to be out of the chambers by 4:30. So I'll ask Ms. Hintz if she could remember to send out a reminder on Monday. Excuse me? In big print, yes.
Thank you.